Welcome back to Cultural Anthropology. I'm David Leitner. I'm your instructor for the term, and today I want to talk a little bit more about the four fields of anthropology and how they take different perspectives on what it means to be human, and also the question of how do cultural anthropologists in particular study culture? What is it? How do we study it? So, let's get into it. As I mentioned in the first video, there are four main fields of anthropology. They each take a different perspective on what it means to be human. Biological anthropologists look through the lens of biology and evolution. Archaeologists look at history and material culture. Material culture is all the things we leave behind and the marks on the landscape, our trash, our food, everything. Linguistic anthropology looks at communication and language, and cultural anthropology sees through the lens of culture, our habits, beliefs, customs, etc. To get a little more specific, biological anthropology is about understanding human beings as biological organisms in the context of evolution. Okay, that is, we have an evolutionary history. Evolution has shaped our biology in specific ways to produce who we are as a species and what we are as a species. It looks at diversity, at human biological diversity and variation. A lot of work on race, more about what race isn't than what it is. Take my biological anthro class. We'll get into it a little bit in this class, but race as a biological concept does not apply to human beings. Race is the same as subspecies. Humans are too closely related, all of us, to satisfy the definition of a subspecies anywhere in it. We're just all so closely related. We study genetics, we study anatomy and physiology, and we study medicine. The evolution that we are concerned with is not just Homo sapiens, but also our ancestors living in the past, going back millions of years, on our branch of the evolutionary tree, but also our close cousins in the order of primates. This is called primatology. It's a specific branch of biological anthropology that focuses on both the living and the extinct primates. So primates are like monkeys, apes, including gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, that sort of thing. So biological anthropologists have this view of being human that is set in a context of evolution and biology. Archaeology, they try to understand how humans lived in the past. The past can be quite recent, but they are primarily concerned with looking at material culture. Material culture is simply the durable remains of what we leave behind. Our trash, yes, sometimes it does include, things like burial goods that are often quite valuable, or at least were quite valuable to the people who left them there. But it is as much about looking at trash pits or fire pits and what kinds of bones people threw into the fire, that sort of thing, so we can understand what they ate. This gives us a great picture, not just of the great kings and queens or leaders that lived in the past and who they were, but we get a picture of the everyday life of individuals in the past, which is far more valuable to us than collecting gold idols and the such. It also includes the marks we leave on the landscape. There are fields that were plowed 1,000 years ago that have been left untended for hundreds of years in England that can be, and the tilling marks, the furrows, can still be seen from aerial photographs of the land, even though from the ground there's no evidence of them whatsoever. So we leave marks all the time. This is what it's about. It tells us about human activity in the past. Linguistic anthropologists study communication, both verbal and nonverbal. This includes languages, which have grammars, or rudimentary grammars at the very least, spoken and written forms of communication, but also slang as well as dialects. It's not so concerned about what are the official rules of grammar here. Rather, how do people actually use grammar? How do they use language to communicate? Hey, I just did what I'm about to talk about. Other kinds of utterances. That's a filler. It tells you that I'm still thinking and that I haven't quite sort of finished my thought yet, and to give me a little more time. These are, but there are also nonverbal ways of communicating as well. Symbols, body language, rituals, and most importantly for sociolinguistics, which is another branch of linguistic anthropology, we're very concerned about what are the circumstances surrounding the act of communication. Who is speaking? Who are they? To whom are they speaking? What is the context of it? What kind of event is it? Are there other people around? Who is the utterance for? Is it for the person you're speaking to, or is there another audience? These are all questions that come out of sociolinguistics, and they tell us how people enact culture through language. They enact power through language. They enact social differences through language. Finally, cultural anthropology. Cultural anthropologists study human variation in our ways of life, our beliefs, rituals, traditions, the foods we eat. These are all very obvious forms of this. That is culture. So culture, these beliefs, traditions, customs that we've been talking about, it is everywhere in your life. It makes the world seem as if your way of doing things is the only way or the best way of doing things. That's because it feels like it comes naturally. That these are just the natural consequences of the world being the way it is. The problem is, culture is what tells you the world is the way it is. And that means that we tend to be prone to ethnocentrism, that is sort of feeling like our culture is the only correct culture out there. And that makes us want to judge other people's cultures. That's a bit of a problem, right? Ethnocentrism is a universal tendency in human beings. We all do it, even anthropologists. And being ethnocentric is just a consequence of how culture works. Doesn't mean we shouldn't strive to get beyond it, because it can have some very negative effects. It also is what makes culture work so well. I treat my culture as if it is the way the world really is, and that way I don't think about the little things all the time. Like, how should I hold my fork? How should I, if I act badly, what will happen to me? That sort of thing. But if our goal, like in anthropology, is to understand other people and understand their cultures, we have to get around ethnocentrism somehow. And anthropologists have a number of tools for doing that. The first is this perspective called cultural relativism. Cultural relativity, or cultural relativism, is a methodological approach to understanding the world. What do I mean by that? I mean, we are using this perspective not as a way to guide our lives, but as a way to understand things. The same way the scientific method is a method for inquiring about natural phenomena, cultural relativism is a method for trying to inquire about cultural phenomena. It essentially says you have to suspend your judgments on people until you strive to understand it from their perspective. That's it. Simple as that. Doesn't mean don't ever judge, but it does say you need to dig into this first and try to understand it from their point of view and whether it matches their cultural standards or not. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. Doesn't mean you have to endorse it. It just means you're trying to understand it. And context in this case is always key to understanding things. And the only way you get context is if you take away your culture, which is going to fill in the context in place of their culture. But how do we actually get to cultural relativity? Two main ways. The first we talked about previously, the holistic perspective. That is the parable of the elephant in the dark that I mentioned in the previous video, and really trying to take multiple points of view on a problem. Not just looking at, for instance, not just looking at this cartoon, for instance, from an artistic point of view, or a political point of view, but we can look at it from a religious point of view. We can look at it as from a symbolic point of view. We can look at it from all sorts of different points of view, and we try and take all of those into account to understand how they're connected. The second is the comparative method, and that's one I want to go into a little deeper in this video. The comparative method sounds simple. It's just like part of how we learn is by comparing things to one another. But how do you compare things? There are different ways to make comparisons. What should you be comparing, and why compare in the first place? Well, we don't just compare to see difference. We compare to see difference and similarity at the same time. We are not trying to rank cultures, as some are more civilized, some are less civilized. Some anthropologists did do that in the past. It was a really bad idea. It was based on poor logic at the time, and continues to be based in poor logic today, so we don't do it. We try not to. So why do we do it? We do it to see the differences between things, okay? We can look at these two fruit, and we can see that they're different colors, for instance, by comparing them. We see it to see similarities. We can see they're both round. They're both approximately the same size. And it's in understanding that combination of difference and similarity together that we get a holistic point of view. It's trying to make more of a comparison from ethnography. We're trying to understand the problem from the ground level as well as the sort of 60,000 foot level. We want to see the big picture and the close-up at the same time because they inform each other. They give us more information than we had to begin with. Comparative method is one way to do that. To give you an example, take a second and pause the video, and while it's paused, try to come up with as many words as you can think of to describe this ball. I'll give you a little bit of time. Okay, so now we're back. I want you to keep that list, and now I want you to make another list. Now you've got two different balls. Try and describe as many different words as you can to describe this ball as well. Keep in mind, what are the similarities and differences between the balls? What do you see? Go ahead and pause the video and do that now. Okay, thanks for coming back. Hopefully, comparing these two changed the way you saw the first ball. Most of the time when I do this, students use words like orange, rough, striped, round to describe the basketball there. And all of a sudden when I show them the crystal ball here, they start saying, oh, that basketball is also solid. Maybe it's light compared to the crystal ball. They start thinking of things that they didn't notice before. They only notice them now because they see a difference. I hope that makes sense. Comparing things allows us to see things we didn't see before. It broadens our perspective on a problem. And that is one of the real reasons we compare, beyond just getting to cultural relativism. It is a way of tricking ourselves out of our assumptions about the world. All right? Tricking ourselves into noticing things we wouldn't have noticed otherwise. We compare because when you set what you think you know about one culture side by side with another, you're going to be surprised by how much you missed. Okay? That is the purpose of comparison. Implicitly, that is what we're doing when we go into the field and do an ethnography of another culture. We are implicitly comparing that culture with our own, always, because we're learning that that's our standpoint, our viewpoint, and that is what we're trying to get at. It's those differences and similarities that strike us as we look at two cultures side by side that generates the good knowledge here. Okay, that's it for today. I hope you have a better sense of the field of anthropology and how the four fields work together to provide us with a holistic point of view, and how the act of comparing things helps get, in combination with the holistic point of view, brings us closer to cultural relativism as an attitude. That is something I want you to do throughout this course. We're going to be reading and talking about things that are going to be at times very uncomfortable for some people because they're going to be so far outside of their experience. Always try and keep a culturally relative perspective on. Keep those anthro glasses tuned. And try and step back from that discomfort for a moment and try and see things from the point of view of that culture. That's all I ask of you. Doesn't mean you can't later sort of make judgments about it. That's fine. We all make judgments eventually, but it's worth taking a second to try and understand it from somebody else's point of view. All right. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe this week, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.